If you're listening to my speech, my audience will know more on what happens when you put good people in a bad environment. I heard about this experiment once and have been researching ever since, for it interests me and I hope to interest others as well. The Stanford prison experiment demonstrates how someone so kind can turn evil when put in a bad environment. First, let's talk about when and why the experiment started. The Stanford prison experiment took place on August 14, 1971, by a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo. Philip held the Stanford prison experiment to conduct research and investigate the impact of situational variables on human behavior. He wanted to expand on the Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiment. Philip Zimbardo was an American psychologist and a professor at Stanford University. Philip was born on March 23, 1933, making him 38 at the time of his experiment. Philip Zimbardo is still currently alive at 90 years old and never saw jail time for his offenses. Discuss the background information regarding the when and why the Stanford prison experiment was conducted. Now let's take a look at the volunteers. More than 70 young men volunteered to take part in the Stanford prison experiment after seeing an advertisement for a psychological study of prison life for $15 a day. There were just over 70 undergraduate students that volunteered to play the roles of both prisoners and guards in the Stanford prison experiment. This experiment allowed college students to experiment with prison life while making money. During the Stanford prison experiment, they paid all volunteers $15 a day. For college students, this ad piqued their interest, for most didn't already have jobs. These students were chosen from a pool of 70 students that reached out after seeing the advertisement. These volunteers had no criminal background, no psychological issues, and no significant medical issues. They then chose 24 of those 70 with none of those mentioned issues to participate in their experiment. The Stanford prison experiment was scheduled to last 2 weeks but was terminated partway through. Per the volunteers' contract, they were allowed to quit at any time if they so please. Many volunteers did end up dropping out. Many wanted to stay for the money of college, and some were even enjoying the experiment, especially the guards, for they had power. Now we have discussed the volunteers' information to the Stanford prison experiment, let's take a look at the experiment itself. They took the 24 volunteers at random, assigned them to either prisoner or guard group, with each group containing 12 volunteers. They created a simulated prison in the basement of the Stanford University building. The simulated prison had 3 6-by-9-foot prison cells. Each prison cell consisted of 3 prisoners. Prisoners were to stay in the prisons 24 hours a day while the study was still going on. Prisoners wore prisoner gowns with numbers on them. The prisoners were dehumanized and no longer went by their real names, and now went by their assigned numbers. Prisoners also had to wear a chain padlock around one ankle. Guards were told not to physically abuse the prisoners. The guards were also issued mirrored sunglasses to help prevent eye contact with the prisoners and prevent seeing emotions. Guards then worked out a system of rewards and punishments to help manage their prisoners. Now that we have talked about the roles and attire of the guards and prisoners, let's talk about what took place during the experiment. The Stanford prison experiment was terminated after 6 days due to the fact of the guards becoming abusive to the prisoners. The prisoners started to show signs of extreme stress and anxiety in the Stanford prison experiment. The guards became very hostile and started to dehumanize their prisoners. Push-ups became a common form of punishment for the prisoners, and sometimes the guard would even step on the backs of the prisoners or make the other prisoners sit on the backs of them to make it harder for them. The guards got their hands on a fire extinguisher and proceeded to spray the prisoners with skin-chilling carbon dioxide when the prisoners tried to rebel. Those prisoners that were well behaved were able to go to the privileged cell, where they were allowed to brush their teeth, got beds, uniforms, and wash up. Those that were misbehaved, the guards took away their beds and their clothes and allowed them no comfort. They were allowed minimal food and bathroom breaks, in which their bathroom was a bucket, which adds to the crappy environment of having to smell that as you were trying to sleep. They then allowed family and friends to visit for a day, but to avoid families thinking the environment for the boys were bad and forcing them to let them take them home, they made a few changes to the looks of things. They allowed both the guards and prisoners to wash up, shave, and groom, also had the prisoners clean up their cells, feed them dinner, played music, and had a cheerleader from Stanford greet the families as they came in. Now that we've discussed the experiment, let's discuss their findings and results of the Stanford prison experiment. The Stanford prison experiment was scheduled to last 2 weeks. It ended in just under a week, due to the fact of the prisoners experiencing large amounts of stress and anxiety. The researchers started to lose sight of the reality of the experiment. Zimbardo, who was the prison warden, just turned a blind eye to the abusive behavior of the guards with the prisoners. This experiment showed how powerful situation variable can play a huge role in human behavior. They also noticed how giving someone power can go to their head and affect their behavior. The prisoners who had no power became very submissive and depressed. One prisoner tried to leave and was tricked into thinking he was unable to leave and started the rumor to tell all prisoners that they were unable to leave and they were stuck there. The prisoners then started to be very depressed and have extreme cases of anxiety. On the end of day 5, 4 of the prisoners began to show extreme cases of negative emotions, crying, and anxiety, and then had to be released. On the 5th day, a fellow psychologist of Zimbardo decided to pay a visit and see the experiment firsthand. At first glance, this psychologist, whose name is Christina, felt sick to her stomach seeing the conditions of this experiment. Christina voiced her objections of the conditions of this experiment, how the simulated prison, and the moral and ethical issues that were involved to Zimbardo. Zimbardo then called off the experiment on the 6th day due to Christina and agreed of the moral and ethical issues that were flawed during this. To sum it all up, the Stanford prison experiment was a psychological experiment conducted to see if someone can turn evil based on their situational variables. The Stanford prison experiment, after 6 days, the prisoners and guards were mentally and physically altered poorly during this experiment. Therefore, the experiment was terminated on day 6.
Strict prisoners' bathroom use, and as tensions rise, so do their cruel methods. Within just 6 days of the planned 2-week study, conditions are so bad that the entire operation is shut down.
I'm inside! Help me out!